My name is Ryan Harp, and this is FTH 212 striker-fired handguns. This is going to be an assignment number 5. For today's assignment, we will be working on the firearm. It is in the workspace, so safety is always a must. First things first, we've made sure that the area is free and clear of any live ammunition. And then next, we need to visually and physically inspect the chamber, make sure that it's empty, visually and physically inspect the chamber again. Of course, all feed source, ammunition source is removed from the weapon. If not, we'd remove that first. We are certain now at this point in time that there is no live ammunition into the firearm. The weapon is safe. So for today's assignment, the first thing that we need to do is an initial assessment, which is going to be followed by a test of the trigger weight. Then next, we're going to apply some layout dye to some areas, try and polish those areas. We'll get another trigger weight, and then after that, we'll install some aftermarket components, and we'll get another trigger weight on the gun, trying to give the trigger the best feeling that we possibly can without making it unsafe. We have went back through the firearm, again, made sure it's clear, no live ammunition in the workspace. And we've assessed the feeling of this trigger, as well as get some initial trigger measurements. So we took a total of 6 measurements, 5 1/4, 5 1/4, 5.125, 5 even, 4.95, and 4.95 pounds, for an average of 5.0875 pounds of trigger pull. So that is the easy part, is going through, but assessing this trigger, there's a lot to be improved. So number one is this take-up. So there's so much take-up on this trigger before you get to the wall. I would venture to say it's at least 1/4 to 1/2 inch of take-up on the trigger, and then it's just not smooth at all. You can feel it interacting with other metal components. You can feel it interacting with the frame itself. So there's a lot to be desired about the feeling of this trigger compared to some other firearms that I've been firearm field stripped. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to go into disassembly. We're going to take the firearm apart, apply some layout dye in some areas in order to find out where we have the most interaction and see what we can do to adjust. I can see from some areas of wear on here where I assume we're going to need to adjust, but one area we're going to definitely need to do is on this cruciform as well as the connector. Okay, so we've got the frame reassembled. We've marked some areas with layout dye. Our next step is going to be to reassemble the pistol and run the slide about 10 times or so, at least 10 times or so, maybe more, to try and see where we've got some negative interaction on the between the slide, the cruciform, and some other areas on the pistol.
Let's see what areas we need to look at. So, as I suspected, right there on the trigger bar, we're getting some massive interaction from these little ribs on the inside of the polymer. So I'm probably going to take that down just a little bit. Not too much, I don't want to mess with the structural integrity. Take this apart. Alright, so on the actual cruciform, so we can see we're getting some interaction right here, and it's actually getting some deep gouges. So I don't know that my focus is going to actually be on the cruciform. Instead, I'm probably going to work to smooth out the backside of here. And this is the stripper, where it strips the round off the magazine, so I don't need back here as flush as I need right here. So we're going to try and smooth that out. But then, as we look overall, we can see there's some of the layout dye removed right here. And that is actually interacting right here on the rail component. So we can see where that interaction is taking place. So we'll smooth out that area. And then, when we look at our actual sear surface, if I can get it into focus, should be there. We're not getting a good even contact on the sear surface with the striker, so we're going to smooth out the striker, make sure there's no machine marks there, and we're just going to use our stone to stone that area. So of the areas, most of the areas that we're going to address will be stoned. So back here on our cruciform, we're going to stone right here, just to make sure it's all smooth on the cruciform. On our disconnect and connector over here, again, we're going to stone. We're not going to use our polishing compound. All we're looking to do with the stoning is to remove any burrs that are causing these issues. These two ribs over here, I'm going to get, like I said, moderately aggressive on the frame. I'm not removing enough material to affect the structure of the material, but I am going to remove enough of these little polymer ribs right here, so we're not seeing that interaction. So I'll probably knock those down by about 1/100th, 200th of an inch or so, and that may be even overextending what I actually intend on doing. Where I do intend to polish is, so in the inside of the rail piece right here, so we don't have any burrs on this, but we are starting to see some wear. If I can get it into focus where the area is, we're starting to see some wear, so I'm going to polish that and get that ultra smooth. Other areas where I don't need to stone, but I'm going to polish just to get them very smooth, is over here for our firing pin safety, our plunger safety, striker safety. I'm going to smooth that out so I'm getting even contact, so that's going to get polished. And then I'll probably polish the entire upper part of the rail, and this entire backside I'll polish instead of stone, just to get it very smooth. The underside of the cruciform and over on the trigger bar, I'll polish all of that. But the surfaces where the angle and everything is very important, that is all going to be just stonework. And then where we have less concern, I'm not going to say no concern, but less concern about the geometry, we're going to polish through with our polishing. As I said, we got rid of those ribs over here, smooth that out. It doesn't appear as it affects any of the structural integrity. So inside of here, we had some very deep gouge marks from some imperfections that were over here on the trigger bar. So we smoothed out both surfaces to allow for just less friction as they're crossing over each other. On the trigger bar, so we stoned on all of the top of the cruciform. Also stoned the edge of the sear, making sure not to change the geometry at all. Just very, very light stoning with oil. We polished this top rail to make it nice and smooth. We can still see some of the tooling or machine marks on there. We didn't want to take much metal away, if anything. Just wanted to try and get those tool marks less noticeable. Same over here. And then on this side of the trigger bar, we just polished it, just trying to get it smooth. Again, removed any tool marks that we had in areas that are having any friction. I know we're replacing this later, but we had some tool marks and some rub marks all over the front face, so we wanted to do what we could to decrease any friction, trying to make that the comfort of the trigger a lot more noticeable. And then the last place that we stoned is right here. We did some light stoning. As you can see from the fact we still have finish in there, it is not the best surface overall, but I believe we got rid of that high mark that was digging into the top of our cruciform. So we're going to reassemble the pistol and get another feel and trigger weight. Just finish replacing the springs and the connector and testing the trigger measurement. So the new trigger measurement, the average that we're going to get is 3.95 pounds. We replaced the spring, the factory springs, with the 3-pound set from the competition set, and we've replaced the connector with the ghost connector. This did require some fitting to get it in place, but now the biggest thing that I noticed with this, and we'll go ahead and make sure that it is clear visually and physically inspect chamber, go ahead and do it again. So the biggest thing that I noticed with this firearm now is that take-up that I was complaining about before is gone. So I was able to get it, so as soon as I get any pressure on the trigger, I'm on that wall. And then now with the just under 4 pounds of pressure it takes to pull through, I mean, we're through the trigger that fast, no movement. So after the modifications that we've made, it's a totally different trigger pull. It feels very much like a competition trigger. It feels very stiff, very rigid, which is how I like my trigger to feel. There's no mush. All the grit is out of there from smoothing out those pieces. The break off of the striker is nice and crisp. It's just a definite different picture now with the work that we put in, as well as replacing that connector and the springs. Alright, so we went through, we polished, we've reassembled, and we've taken some more trigger weights using my Wheeler digital weight measurement. The weights that I've got were 4.75, 5.25, 5.25, 4.59, and 4.50, and a 5, which left me with an average of 4.87. So before polishing, we were at about 5.8, and now we dropped down to about a 4.87. So there is some difference in the weight of the trigger pull. And again, the firearm is clear, so we're going to set that back up. So as far as the feel goes, the noticeable grittiness is much better. However, that take-up is still there. The only thing that I can think of that's going to remove some of that take-up on there is going to be replacing the connector. So next up, we're going to be replacing the connector and replacing some of the springs inside the Glocks. So we've got a 2-pound striker spring, a 4-pound, and a 6-pound. Right now inside of there, my assumption is the 4 pounds in there, but we're going to go with the 4-pound. So we'll replace it, we'll disassemble it, replace all the springs, we'll replace the connector, and we'll see where that gets us. The final portion of today's assignment is to address the questions about altering the factory components. So, are there any modifications that I would make to trigger components to improve trigger and feel and weight? So, generally speaking, for a customer's gun, I would just replace the entire trigger system with an aftermarket brand before I put in these modifications, just because of liability and everything like that. I've gotten this down under 4 pounds of trigger pull. I know that's not the industry safe standard, and I wouldn't want to put that into somebody's hands. As far as other modifications go, it's a striker fire trigger. I do not like the shape of the trigger. I'd much prefer a standard like Glock trigger, so that's one modification I would make to the factory stuff, but that's not a modification, just a replacement. The next question is, would the firearm pass the safety inspection after these modifications were made? Yes, it passes the safety inspection. I've went ahead and tested to make sure that we don't have any problems with the sear safety or anything like that in there. The striker safety, everything seems to be working fine. So, and then the final question is, if any other modifications were made, might these modifications negatively affect the performance of the system and how? Yeah, of course. So if you continue to change stuff and change and change and change, eventually you're going to find that point to where the change is adverse, where it's no longer beneficial. So if we continue to make changes and continue to try and decrease the trigger weight, continue to try and smooth everything out, alter any geometric shapes, we can start to find issues with the firearm that we don't want to deal with.
The reference material for today's assignment came from FTH 212 Modules 2 and Module 4 lecture material, and that is from the Sonoran Desert Institute.